How much money should you actually have saved right now, at your age? Not the fantasy number from finance gurus, the real one. In the next few minutes, you're getting the honest benchmark for every stage of life, from 25 years old all the way past 60, plus the amount most people actually have at each stage, which is very different. And if you're behind, don't click away. The catch-up math near the end surprises almost everyone, in a good way. One thing before we start, these benchmarks are general guidelines, not a verdict on your life. Different countries, careers, and starting points change the picture, but you can't fix a position you've never located, so let's locate yours. First, the framework, because every benchmark in this video comes from one simple rule. The most widely used guideline in personal finance says, aim to have 1 times your annual salary saved by 30 years old, 3 times your salary by 40 years old, 6 times by 50 years old, and around 8 to 10 times by the time you retire. Notice that it scales with your salary, not some fixed magic number. If you earn $40,000 a year, your target at 30 years old is $40,000. If you earn $80,000, it's $80,000. That makes the benchmark fair across different incomes. Now let's walk through it decade by decade and see what people actually have. Your 20s. The benchmark, by 25 years old, roughly half your annual salary saved. By 30 years old, 1 full year of salary. Sound impossible? Here's the honest truth about this decade. The specific amount matters less than at any other stage. What your 20s are really for is building the machine, the automatic transfer on payday, the starter emergency fund, your first investment account. Even $50 a month invested when you're 25 years old matters more than $500 a month started when you're 40 because of what compounding does with those extra years. We covered that math in the last video. What do people actually have? Surveys consistently put the typical 20-something savings in the low 4 figures, often under $5,000. So if you have anything saved and a system running, you're already ahead of most of your generation. Your 30s, the decade where the gap starts to show. The benchmark, 1 times your salary when you turn 30 years old, and about 2 times by 35 years old. So on a $60,000 salary, that's $60,000 saved at 30 years old, and $120,000 by 35 years old. Reality check. The typical person in their 30s has nowhere near that. Median figures usually land somewhere between $20,000 and $45,000, and that often includes retirement accounts. If you just did the math on your own numbers and felt your stomach drop, you're in the majority, not the minority. Here's why the 30s are dangerous. This is the decade of lifestyle inflation. Bigger rent, car payments, weddings, kids, income goes up, and somehow there's less left over than there was at 25 years old. If you take one thing from this section, every raise in your 30s, save at least half of it before your lifestyle finds it. That single habit is what separates the people who hit the next benchmark from the ones who never do. Your 40s. The benchmark, 3 times your salary by 40 years old, and around 4 to 5 times by 45 years old. This is where compounding starts doing visible work. If you've been investing since your early 30s, your account now grows by more each year than you deposit. The machine starts pulling its own weight, but the 40s are also the last cheap decade to fix a shortfall. Here's the honest math. Money invested when you're 40 years old still has 25 years to compound before a typical retirement, enough to roughly triple in the market at historical average returns, sometimes more. The same dollar invested at 55 years old might not even double. Behind at 40 years old is fixable at normal savings rates. Behind at 55 years old requires drastic ones. That's the whole reason to face these numbers now instead of later. Typical reality, medians for this age group generally sit around 50 to 100,000, respectable but well short of the 3 times salary target for most incomes. Your 50s? The benchmark says 6 times your salary by 50 years old, 7 times by 55 years old, and 8 times by 60 years old. 2 big levers exist in this decade that younger people don't get. First, this is usually peak earning years, the highest salaries of a career, often with kids off the payroll. The savings rate that was impossible at 35 years old can be very possible at 52 years old. Second, many retirement systems let older workers contribute extra on a tax-advantaged basis. Catch-up provisions designed exactly for this situation. If you're in your 50s and behind, the system is literally built to help you sprint. And past 60 years old, the question changes from how much have I saved to how many years of spending do I have, a topic that deserves its own video. Now, the section I promised, because statistically, most people watching this are behind the benchmark, and most assume that means it's over. Here's the math that says otherwise. Say you're 35 years old with almost nothing saved, worst case. You commit to investing $500 a month into a boring index fund. At historical average market returns, by 65 years old, that's roughly $560,000. From zero. Starting 15 years too late. Push it to $800 a month, aggressive but doable on many incomes, especially with a side income, and you're near $900,000. Again, starting from nothing at 35 years old. The benchmark tells you where you stand. It does not tell you where you'll finish. The three variables that decide your finish line are savings rate, time, and consistency, and you still control all three. What you can't control is yesterday, which is exactly why the worst response to being behind is waiting another year to feel less behind. So how do people actually hit these benchmarks? 3 moves, in order. Move 1, automate a percentage, not an amount. 10 to 15% of every paycheck moved on payday before you see it. Percentages scale automatically when your income grows. Fixed amounts quietly fall behind. Move 2, bank half of every raise. We said it in the last video and it decides this entire chart. Lifestyle inflation is the single biggest reason high earners still miss their benchmarks. Move 3, keep the invested money boring. Broad index funds, automatic monthly buys, no reaction to scary headlines. The people who hit the final benchmark are almost never the ones who found a brilliant investment. They're the ones who never interrupted an average one. So, quick recap of the map. Half your salary saved by 25 years old, 1 times your salary by 30 years old, 3 times by 40 years old, 6 times by 50 years old, 8 or more heading into retirement. Benchmarks, not verdicts. Most people are behind them, and the catch-up math works better than almost anyone believes, but only for the people who start the machine today. This channel exists to make you one of them. Subscribe if this was useful. Every week we break down how money actually works. And the video on your screen covers the 7 money rules that make hitting every one of these benchmarks automatic. See you in the next one.